Hey, let's talk about records. Cheap Heat video number, I don't know what. Bicho Feo coming at you with more inexpensive jazz records that you can find in your local record selling establishment and or Goodwill and or garage sale. Can't guarantee that all these will always be cheap, but in general, they're cheap. And by cheap, I mean oftentimes less than $10, almost always less than 20. Not including postage if you're going the Discogs or eBay route. And some of these things are just great, but they're by lesser known artists or on their weird labels, or they got ugly cover art. I don't know why. It's who knows? You know, people go out and they want a Blue Note and they'll be satisfied with nothing less. And so you're going to pay some money unless you go for a reissue. And even then, you're going to pay some money. So I'm here to share with you some equivalent stuff that's just as good, and don't sleep on it, as the kids are fond of saying. So what's playing in the background is this. Jon Handy, Projections. Jon Handy recorded, I think, 4 records on Columbia in the late 60s, early 70s. And this one is essentially the fourth way. Mike Knock, Michael White, a different drummer, not Eddie Marshall, and Ron McClure. This is Larry Hancock, I think, on drums, plus Jon Handy. So you know that the fourth way is great. Well, if you like the fourth way, get this record. I don't think there's any Fender Rhodes on this, but the quality of the music is extremely high, and this will be playing in the background the whole time, so you'll get to judge it for yourself if you could just block my voice, my droning record nerd voice out. You can listen to the greatness of this music. Anyway, wonderful Michael White on violin. Anyway, the other Jon Handy records on Columbia, I've got them all here. I got 4 of them. I think there was only 4. Projections is the one with the fourth way. The rest of them have guys like I think this says Bobby Hutcherson on it. It's great. A lot of these are recorded live. It says Jerry Hahn, who's a great guitar player. Michael White on violin, and Don Thompson on bass, Canadian bassist of huge, immense reputation. He also plays piano and vibes, but not on this record. He's just on bass. Terry Clark, a fantastic Canadian drummer, is on this. And this is more or less the same band. Terry Clark, Don Thompson, etc., etc. All these records are fantastic. Jon Handy, if you'll recall, played alto sax for Charles Mingus for many years, so he's no slouch. And all of these, I see these albums a lot, even today. And you'll see early pressings of them, you know, the 2i pressing or the 6i pressing or whatever, I don't know. And they'll be practically unplayed. So he also did a record with El Subramaniam and some Indian musicians called Karuna Supreme, which was reissued on Pausa in the US, which also goes for very little money. So check out Jon Handy. His stuff on Roulette is also widely reissued and easy to find and fairly inexpensive. But I'm super into this stuff on Columbia. I mentioned Jerry Hahn. And Jerry Hahn's a really cool guitar player. Played with Gary Burton, Merl Saunders, a bunch of people like that. And he recorded 2 albums. The one I'm going to show you isn't exactly inexpensive. In fact, it's a little pricey, but it was reissued with an ugly cover. The original issue is pretty ugly too, and goes for next to nothing. So this is called Ara-Be-In by the Jerry Hahn Quintet, which at this time included Jack DeJohnette, Mike White, again on violin, Noel Jukes on reeds, and Ron McClure on bass. So there's 3/4 of the fourth way, plus Jack DeJohnette. So this is a fantastic record. This was reissued on Arhoolie Records with a kind of a marbled cover and a picture of Jerry Hahn right in the middle. It was reissued in 1975. This is from '68, I believe. Great record. Seriously, fantastic record of early sort of jazz rock. And the reissue is really inexpensive. This original issue is not as expensive. I mean, it's more expensive, not as cheap. Excuse me. He later on did this record in 1973, which came out on Fantasy, which is a good, solid slab-o jazz funk. Merl Saunders is on it on organ, and Mel Graves and George Marsh on bass and guitar. I mean, on bass and drums, respectively. It's a really good record. It's not killing, but it's a record that you see around a lot and won't cost much money, and it's stuck in my collection for many, many years. I think it'll do the same in yours. These records I've never understood why they go for next to nothing. Jimmy Owens is a trumpet player, flugelhorn and trumpet player, and he came to my attention because he played on Billy Cobham's Spectrum album, which is one of my favorite all-time records. And basically chased down every artist on that record and found their stuff, because I thought it was going to be like Spectrum, and some of it is, but most of it isn't, but all of it's really good. Anyway, these records are great, and this one's from the late 60s. It's on Atlantic, and you can get this for next to nothing, even on Discogs. And it's just a great sort of post-bop modal jazz record with Kenny Barron on piano, Benny Maupin on tenor sax, Freddie Waits on drums. I mean, the personnel on this is just killing. Highly recommended. They do a Boogaloo tune in 7, which is kind of witty for the time. You'd Better Listen, it's called. This record, I lusted after for many years and couldn't find. It's on Polydor Records, because it's got Cobham on drums, and I'm just crazy about Billy Cobham's playing. This has also got Sam Brown on guitar, Billy Harper on tenor sax. You get the idea. There's some really great players on this record. Kenny Barron, again, on electric and acoustic piano. So this is a really cool record. Also doesn't go for much money at all. It's not superb all the way through. There's some sort of jokey sort of tracks on here that I'm like, why did they do this? But for the most part, it's a really cool record that you can get for next to nothing. I really like it a lot. It's pretty obscure. A lot of people don't know about this. Jimmy Owens also recorded a couple records on the A&M Horizon label, which, if you like jazz funk, which I do, they're worth chasing down. But this one, check it out. There's a couple of sort of novelty tunes on this. I don't know how else to explain it. But for the most part, this is super heavy, really good sort of almost Strata East sounding stuff. The Inner City label doesn't get a lot of traction, doesn't get a lot of respect. A lot of people think the pressings don't sound good, or they did redistribute a lot of stuff on Enja in the States, but they also did a lot of their own releases, original releases, and this is pretty much the cream of the crop. This could be found for a couple of bucks in most locations. Ernie Krivda still is one of the major figures in jazz saxophone in the Cleveland, Ohio area. I believe he's a mentor of Joe Lovano. And this was his first solo record, credited to Ernie Krivda and Friends. It's titled Satanic. And he might have been upset about that title. The personnel on this record is crazy. Bob Moses, Rock Kalam, Bob Moses on drums. Jeff Berlin on electric bass. Gil Goldstein on Fender Rhodes, and Ray Mantilla on congas. This is a really great record of sort of Eastern European tinged jazz with sort of a fusion-y jazz rocky edge. Lots of energy, lots of just insane saxophone playing by Mr. Krivda. I really like this record. I've had it ever since it came out, and it came out in 76, I believe. 77. It's 1977. Anyway, be on the lookout for this one. It's pure fire all the way through. Another record, I've got the record stacked up behind me, so excuse me for turning my head. Another record that didn't really get any attention when it came out, but should be getting some now, is this one by a group called Zytron, led by Jimmy Zitro, who did a record on ESP, oddly enough, a free jazz record. He's a drummer, and that ESP record is actually really good. But this could be had for not much money at all, a few bucks. It's called New Moon and Zit Ron. It's got amazing personnel. Well, actually, I've never heard of any of these guys except for Dave Liebman on tenor sax. The rest of the guys are, I think, California guys, local guys, but they're great. Stan Poplin on bass, Paul Nagel on piano, it says on the back here, but it's mostly Fender Rhodes. Paul Contos on flute. So you might not have heard of all the players, you might not know James Zitro, but if you're into what they call spiritual jazz, like all the other kids are, you'll want to get this record. It is superb, start to finish. It is amazing. You'll be scratching your head like, why doesn't this record go for big bucks? Because it's as good as anything on the real sought-after labels. It's on Pacific Arts Records, which actually did a bunch of really good records back in the 70s. This could be gotten, though, for not much money at all. Can't tell you enough how great this record is. Try to find it. Go online and get it. It's that good. It's New Moon and Zit Ron by Jimmy Zitro and his band Zytron. Zytron. This is another real sleeper from the late 70s. Al Gafa played guitar with Dizzy Gillespie for a long time. And while not being a fusion type guitarist by any stretch of the imagination, he's all over the fretboard, really capable player. And this is a really just kind of mellow jazz fusion sort of LP without being smooth jazz. It's not smooth at all. It's a mellow sort of jazz sound with lots of Fender Rhodes, lots of really just superb guitar playing. Great personnel. Mickey Roker is on this. No, Al Foster is on this. Al Foster, Azeden Weston, Ben Brown, who at the time was Dizzy Gillespie's bassist. And the piano player is, again, Kenny Barron, and he plays equally, it says piano on the back, Rhodes and acoustic piano. So check this one out. It's a real sleeper. This was sent to me by my friend Chris Cole, but you should be able to find it for like $5. And it's on Pablo Records too, so that's not a label that gets a lot of respect, mostly because it's very kind of traditional. Enja Records, Rears is Ugly, well, Beautiful Head Again, I should say. This is a really fine record by the vibroharpist David Friedman. He also plays marimba. He's still around, still active, still playing, still crushing it out there. This is called Futures Past, and it's got great personnel again. David Friedman on mallet percussion, Pat Rebelo on keyboards, Harvey Swartz on bass, Bruce Ditness on drums. Bruce Ditness is a killing Tony Williams influenced drummer, and Ramona Francis on vocals. You might know her from her record on MPS, which is really sought after and really excellent. Anyway, this record is easily as good as anything you'll find for $40. This will cost you maybe $5, maybe $10. It's a reissue of a German album. I've only seen the American pressing of this. I'm sure the German press is out there somewhere. But it's got a monk tune, but it's got a bunch of originals on here, and it's just a fabulous record that people tend to sleep on. Again, it's not one of these records that's going to bowl you over with greatness. It's a really beautiful, lovely, solid jazz outing. Speaking of which, there are not many private press records from the 70s that go for peanuts. This, however, is one of them. And if you look at the band on here, you'll be scratching your head. Joanne Brackeen on piano, Billy Hart on drums, Cecil McBee on bass, and Joshua Breakstone, who's still around, mostly in a straight-ahead mode, on guitar on a couple of tracks. Glenn Hall is a tenor saxophonist, and this, again, is a really nice record. It sort of skirts the boundary between modal and out jazz, and he put it out himself, and it's not an expensive record. It's a private press, sort of avant-garde-ish leaning record that goes for less than $10. Kind of like that Kenny Gill record. Maybe a little bit more out than that, but highly recommended. I still see this around. I had to get this online, but it's not all original compositions. One side has a Sonny Rollins and a Wayne Shorter composition on it. The other side has 3 originals and one by Manfred Schoof, who's, if you know me, you know that I'm a big Manfred Schoof fan. Anyway, Glenn Hall, Book of the Heart, it's called, and definitely worth hunting down. Okay, got a few more goodies in here. Actually, I got a bunch more. I'm gonna save that. I got some real out stuff. I'm gonna save that till later. Here's 3 records sort of from the modern post-bop modal jazz mode that you should pay attention to, that could be had for very little money. Very little money. Dan Wall later on joined John Abercrombie's group as an organ player. Here he plays mostly Hammond B3, but also some Fender Rhodes, I believe. Other personnel, oh no organ on this at all. Pianos and ARP synthesizers. Steve Grossman, Mike Richmond, and Jimmy Madison. Great quartet. Really fantastic record. I've seen this for next to nothing. And again, it's on a small label, Landslide, out of Atlanta, Georgia. Highly recommended. All original compositions, I believe, except for one. Dan Wall, really cool keyboard player, was on those David Earl Johnson records. Also played with Bruce Hampton for a long time. So check it out. But he rose to prominence in the 90s and 2000s as the keyboard player in John Abercrombie's group. Speaking of Jimmy Madison, who played drums on that record, he's also got his own record out, which is pretty inexpensive. It's called Bumps on a Smooth Surface. When you hear the personnel on this, you'll think, oh my gosh, Harold Danko, Tom Harrell, Larry Schneider, Bill Washer, and Mike Richmond. So killing personnel on this. This is a great modern modal jazz record. It's not a free jazz record. It's not a fusion record. The Tom Harrell's the big giveaway on this. It really sounds to me like sort of a Tom Harrell, Freddie Hubbard kind of a record. It's not smooth at all. It's really good post-bop modal jazz. Not completely acoustic. I think there's a Fender Rhodes track or 2 on this. And of course, Bill Washer on electric guitar. He was with, he was with Barry Miles for years, and kind of stomps on the fuzz box here and there. Speaking of amazing guitar players, Jack Wilkins is another name that goes way under-recognized way too often. And this is a record he did on Chiaroscuro Records. I've mentioned them previously. This is a really good modern modal jazz record with a couple of really stellar tracks on it. It's got Randy Brecker and Eddie Gomez and Jack DeJohnette on it. And there's some really, really just flaming, screaming hot stuff on this. And then there's some like samba type stuff and mellower sounds. But it's an interesting record. It's guitar, trumpet, bass, and drums. Randy Brecker isn't too plugged in on this, I don't think. But another good record that can be found pretty inexpensively that's really good. And Jack Wilkins is just an amazing player. I mentioned small label records earlier, and these are another 2 by the same artist that I've never quite understood why these don't go for more money, but they just don't. John Spider Martin is a saxophonist. I think he's from the South. And both of these records were released on small labels. This one is on Edmar Records, and this one is on the Improv label. Both of these have great personnel, and they're kind of in a soul jazz sort of mode. They get a little bit more Strata-Easty in spots, but he covers some pop tunes, but they're not bad. And the notable thing about these is the personnel. I think Billy Hart's on one of them, and Joe Locke is on both of them. I think he was a teenager when these were recorded. Really sounding good on vibes here, though. There's some Fender Rhodes on these. They're just really good records, really strong records, and they're the kinds of records that people pass over, but you should not pass them over now. So this one's called Absolutely, and this one's called Amasia. And they're both really good. Some sort of a soul jazz sound on those. Okay, I'm going to try to wrap this up. It's getting rather late in the game. This is another inner city record that you should check out if you have time. Niels Henning, Orsted Peterson, Jaywalkin'. I just mentioned this because it's got a lot of Fender Rhodes on it. If you're a Fender Rhodes freak like me, you're going to love this record. Philip Catherine on guitar. Billy Higgins on drums, and he's burning on this. And Ole Hansen. It says piano on this. It's all Fender Rhodes. Jaywalkin'. It's a really cool record. Almost all originals, and another really just record that is around that you could grab and surprise your friends with. This is another one. It's on the Affinity label. Mostly Affinity is famous for reissuing the BYG catalog, but they also did a number of their own releases, kind of like Inner City in that regard. They did their own releases, and this is by the Don Willer Spring Quartet. And Don Weller was a British saxophone player, and he's naming this the Spring Quartet because it's got this amazing drummer on here named Brian Spring, who is in Nucleus. This is not a fusion record. This again is sort of a post-bop modal jazz record, and they get out, but it's not a free jazz record. It's called Commit No Nuisance, and I highly recommend this. I got this for like $1 somewhere, sealed. So it's Don Weller, Martin Blackwell on piano. I think it's all acoustic. I don't think there's any Rhodes. Roy Babington on bass from Soft Machine, and the great Brian Spring on drums, he's got to be heard to be believed. I wish there was video of that guy playing. I'll need to look for that. There are free jazz records out there that are cheap. Some because they're reissues, some because the cover is a little off-putting. In the latter category is this, Michael Smith. Very prolific artist in the 70s. Amazing Cecil Taylor influenced piano player who later on sort of crossed over into the classical realm. This is a great record on Storyville. He recorded a bunch of other records, and if you ever see anything by him, even the solo piano stuff is out there and very complicated and very angry. I really like it. Lawrence Cook on drums. Who else is on this? Shoot. Ivan Krilzarin on drums. I don't know who else is on here, but it's a really cool record. It's a really cool avant-garde free jazz record that could be had for next to nothing. And really, Michael Smith is an artist to look out for. He recorded a bunch of records on Pol Jazz and Musa, the Polish labels. And if you can find those cheap, get them. They're super good. A lot of them have this amazing French alto saxophone player on called Claude Bernard, and just really worth getting if you're into free jazz. And finally, I've got to show this, the Human Arts Ensemble featuring C. Bobo Shaw, Under the Sun. This is a reissue. The original pressing of this came out on Shaw's own label. Will set you back $50 at least, maybe $100. This is a reissue that came out on Arista Freedom in the 70s. And if you're thinking that this is free jazz, think again. It's kind of got free elements and free moments, but it's more in a sort of Miles Bitches Brew sort of mode. There's an uncredited, on this jacket, there's an uncredited Fender Rhodes piano player. He's credited properly on subsequent issues of the record and also on the original, but he's not credited on this. And you think, oh, this is going to be a complete avant-garde free jazz blowout. Well, it's not. It's trancey, funky, kind of weird. There's some simultaneous soloing, of course. There's some amazing players on here. Oliver Lake, J.D. Perron, who else? Gosh, Vincent Terrell on cello. Just a bunch of really cool St. Louis musicians from the Black Artists Group. Highly recommend this record. He did another one that got issued on Arista Freedom that's much more in the free jazz mode. But this one, Under the Sun, if you're looking for under the radar, Miles Davis Bitches Brew style record, that's the one to get. So once again, I've gone 4 minutes over my limit. I better get out of here. I'll talk to you again real soon about records. Inexpensive records.